where Mark had never heard of King George County, Virginia before. So what he's going to talk about if you don't know nothing about it? Well, this was a trip, and I was describing to Renee and some of the others of my getting started in my genealogy, my family history. And Renee says, "Well, you need to talk about it." And I don't know. And but I enjoyed telling everybody what happened and what we did. There's going to be, if I can get this to work, there's going to be some stuff y'all going to need to read. I am not going to read it for you. Remember, I'm from South Carolina, so we don't talk very good. One of the things that we had done when we started was, and you're going to see this here shortly, is that why, and to get other family members involved. And if y'all have gone through the same thing I have gone through, it's hard to get people interested in genealogy. And we had a reunion on my mother's side recently, and when I mentioned a couple of names, the younger people said, "We're really related to them," and you'll see who that is here shortly. One of the things that you saw, the first that came up about whoever wrote it was anonymous, and then I sat down and put my thoughts together and trying to really sell. Come on in. Where are you trying to go?
Come on in.
We have no idea who those people are. Come on in.
It's been quite a few years.
Well, come on in. One of the things that I wanted to kind of show and tell people, and of course my wife didn't know I was putting her picture up, but my father used to say, and he was very big into our Scottish history, to do that we need to know where we came from to know where we're going. I've always heard that. My dad used to say that all the time. It's kind of oxymoron if you see something here shortly, but I truly believe that. And we need to know where we came from to know where we're going. You'll see a small tree of my family. My dad was a McColman, my mother was an Adams. I was born and raised in Columbia, South Carolina. I worked there until 2016. Retired law enforcement officer. Worked 31 years, retired from the Richland County Sheriff's Department, and now I do contract work for Fredericksburg and Stafford. So I count those because I still get to hang around the popo. At least I don't have to do the paperwork like they do or put up with the BS that they have to now. And the reason I say that is because my parents are from Gibson, North Carolina. If you go from Laurinburg, anybody know where Laurinburg, North Carolina is? And you go on over to the South Carolina line, don't blink your eyes. That's how small town Gibson is. So the beginning of my journey, I already knew about my Scottish background and how deep it, didn't know exactly how deep it ran. But the McColmans are a set of the Buchanan clan from the Loch Lomond and the Scottish Highlands. I never got to know my grandfathers. I knew my grandmothers. This is my granny, Eva Bell Ledbetter, and that is a cute kid she's holding in her lap. But I'll tell you that my granny was one of those kind of sophisticated type person. She didn't talk much, but my nanny, my dad's mom, we were thicker than thieves. Every time I'd get up and go in the kitchen, she'd be cooking breakfast. Well, Mark, what you want for breakfast? And she'd start naming things off, and you know me. I want it all, Nanny. She was going to cook it anyway because everybody was there. And by the time we finished breakfast, she's already in the kitchen starting to cook lunch. One of the things that I'd asked my dad later on in life, I said, "Dad, where did the Herndon name come from?" Now remember, he knew all about the Scottish side, but he didn't know where Herndon came from. And Dad was born in Cross Creek, North Carolina, which was very confusing because all the research that I've done, all his siblings were born in Gibson. Why were they in Cross Creek? Not only learn about my family, but I also learned more about history and my family's history and the history of King George. So between 1720 and 56, the McColmans came to Cross Creek, North Carolina when they left Scotland. In the 1850 census, there were 16 McColmans living in one household in Cross Creek. Can you imagine when they came out to go to work every morning? It looked like a clown car in a circus coming out the front door. Can you imagine that? 16 people in one house. Kind of like if you having Christmas at our house and everybody's there. There's at least 16 people there. But one thing that I found out about Cross Creek, and I got schooled on this by a professor from St. Andrews College in Laurinburg, somebody told me Cross Creek was a subdivision of Fayetteville. When I said that, you thought that I had taken his wife out. He said, no. When the Scots came across the pond, and they came up the Cape Fear River, it started out as Cross Creek, North Carolina. How many of you in here have ever seen the show Outlander? If you remember, Jamie's talking about we're going to Cross Creek when they coming up the Cape Fear. Cross Creek, North Carolina. So Cross Creek turns into Campbelltown. Campbelltown turns into Fayetteville. If you go to the Fayetteville Police Department, the mall that they're right across from is the Cross Creek Mall. It's still some Cross Creek there. While looking at the area of the Cross Creek, Fayetteville, it's told next to the Gillis Farm, which is an active farm still owned by the Gillises. So I spoke with Andrew Gillis, who's the family historian, and he found out where the McColman home place was. The house is no longer there, but he was able to find out from his grandfather, which is still alive, and he remembered the McColmans. So our talks, trying to locate this property, we found out that Andrew and I are cousins, which is crazy. So they take, his grandfather tells us where to go. We get to the driveway, down the roadway, and then we went back in the woods, and that's where the house was. I was excited because I'm still trying to figure out why my grandmother was in Cross Creek. Well, with the 16 McColmans living in that one household, then I find out my Uncle Lee, my great uncle, my grandfather's brother, was talking to a cousin that it was yesterday, just made contact with her again. When she confirmed it, I found out that my Uncle Lee was living in Rayford, which is just a couple of miles from Cross Creek. So maybe my grandmother and grandfather were visiting my Uncle Lee when her water broke. I don't know. I never will be able to find out. But what's funny is I found more cousins. So I started off with 12 relatives, and here I find Annie Cecilia Herndon. Now I know where the Herndon name came from. Then I find out that her father, my second great-grandfather, was Benjamin Orrin Herndon. And I wanted to learn more about Ben. So you remember last month, Mr. Golden said there was no 5th North Carolina Regiment in the Civil War. I kind of held my mouth shut because there was a 5th North Carolina, because my second great-grandfather fought for the 5th North Carolina. So he was part of Company E in the Confederate Army during the Civil War. They participated in every major battle during the war. So while visiting friends here in King George, we were going to go to Manassas, and he said, no, go to Chancellorsville. It'd be more interesting. I don't know, I've never been to Virginia before. So we go to Chancellorsville. So for some reason, I've always been interested in history, Revolution, Civil War since I was a child. Since the Civil War started in South Carolina, a bunch of hoodlums, so I get interested in it. So we go to Chancellorsville, Park Ranger's office, research a family member in the Civil War. Let's do Ben Herndon. You thought I was giving away pocket protectors at a geek conference. All of a sudden, they started running around like chickens with their head cut off. And they said, how would you like to go stand where your second great-grandfather stood 150 years ago when he was assigned to Stonewall Jackson's brigade? Yes, we're going. So Karen and I drove down, followed their directions, and got there. When we arrived, this is the field we saw. He was part of the infamous Jackson Splink attack. The hair stood up on my arms, and I knew that my second great-grandfather was there. So when I returned home, one of my deputies, I was a lieutenant, and one of my deputies, I found out, was a reenactor for the Civil War. And I was telling him about our findings, and he said, Lieutenant, give me his information. Okay. I said, why? He said, just hold on. So a couple weeks later, he called me and says, Lieutenant, you checked your email? And I hadn't. I just got into the office. So he said, check it. I said, all right, which I did. There was an attachment to that email. And I opened that attachment, and there was a picture. And I said, who is that? He said, that is your second great-grandfather, Benjamin Orrin Herndon. So Benjamin fought at the Battle of Gettysburg. He surrendered at Appomattox Courthouse. And when we were out at Appomattox, one of the park rangers told us, said, the 5th North Carolina was here. Would you like to go see where they stood when Lee surrendered? But there's only, if you've ever been to Appomattox Courthouse, there's only one monument there, and it's the North Carolina monument. And from the park ranger's office to that monument is like 3 miles. So we started walking that way. I said, I ain't walking 3 miles. I've already seen it. He stops at the McColman house and said, this is where the 5th North Carolina was. They watched Lee go in, surrender, and come out. I said, wow, that's pretty cool that my second great-grandfather was here. You know, we hear all this history and we put all these things together, but we never actually think about our family being there. You know, I keep thinking, because Karen and I went to Gettysburg, and all of the men that were killed at Gettysburg, I couldn't believe it. And I said, you know what? If my second great-grandfather had been killed, I wouldn't be here. And saying that, I find out that Joseph Chambers, that name familiar, who's with the Union, served gallantry up on Round Top at Gettysburg. He's a relative. And then we look into, and I'll show you here shortly, how close that came to a lot of people. Both Karen and I have been working on our family tree since '09. While working on my tree, I found my great-grandfather, William Joshua Adams, had married Eliza Ann Easterly. His brother, William Branch Billy Adams, married Sally Fletcher. Another brother, Reverend Shockley Adams, married Martha Fletcher. These names sounding familiar? That's because the Fletcher girls were sisters. So I'm telling my wife about this, and old Karen, first thing comes out of her mouth says, you don't have a family tree, you have a stick as a family. I said, thanks a lot. I love you too. The reason I've mentioned this is Benjamin Orrin Herndon, my father's great-grandfather, married Elizabeth Lizzie Adams. Lizzie was the daughter of my mother's great uncle. Now, quit laughing, it was a small town, okay? All right? Next slide. I say this because I was working on my tree a few years back. I was in the 1400s. I'd gotten back that far. Found James Wilford, which was the sheriff of London during the time, and he sounded familiar. I asked Karen, why was it familiar to me? And Karen says, why are you in my family tree? I said, I'm not in your family tree, I'm in my family tree. Well, She said it can't be because that was her relative, which was the sheriff of London.
Law enforcement runs in your family.
My 14th great grandfather and Karen's 14th great granduncle. Quit laughing, it's a small world also. So we find out through Wilsford that we're related. And I guarantee there's a lot of you that we're all related to. And you're right, that's going to be coming up here in just a second. As I worked on my tree, it led me across the pond. Edward Diggs, Governor of Virginia, 9th great grandfather. Ralph D. Neville, Earl of Westmoreland. Cecily Neville, she was married to Richard Plantagenet, 3rd Duke of York. That's right, I descend from royalty. You may bow at this time. As a matter of fact, my 17th cousin passed away in 2022, and I didn't even know it. Queen Elizabeth II. It's her. Matter of fact, I've traced my lineage to every monarch in England all the way back to William the Conqueror and to Charlemagne. There's a lot of you that have done that also. And then I got to thinking, what happened to me? Where's my, nobody bows for me. There is nobody that, I don't ride in carriages. I don't have these golden, these huge castles, but I should. As I said earlier, my Scottish heritage runs deep. Trace my family line to every monarch except one in Scotland, including Kenneth McColman, king, born in 810. He's traditionally considered the founder of Scotland. I didn't list all of the kings, but I did list the ones that y'all probably heard of before. When I found Robert the Bruce, I said, that's pretty cool. You know, all of us have seen Braveheart. Talked to some friends of mine that live in Scotland, and they said, don't mention Robert the Bruce if you come over here, because he's not favored over there. They consider him a coward.
A what?
A coward. Because he gave up William Wallace and sided with the King of England. Before returning to the States, other notable families. Not going to mention everybody, but some of you may recognize. Sir Winston Leonard Spencer Churchill, Prince Mountbatten, Princess Diana, and you're going to say, I know if you're related to Queen Elizabeth, yes, you're related to these people. If you actually look at this, how I'm related is not through that side, but to other sides. If you actually, does anybody know about the Romanov family? Bob's shaking his head. Anybody else? Tell me what happened in 1918? The whole family was assassinated.
He asked the English to take them and he went by land.
Because the Romanovs were actually related to Queen Elizabeth's grandfather. And if you look at the history and all of the kings and the royal families, they were all related over there at one time, which was amazing to us. And we're watching the different shows that come on about, you know, the different kings and queens, and the names are ringing a bell and how they're related is just crazy. But when I found this, and, you know, for instance, Philip Mountbatten, y'all know how they recognized a couple of the family members? They knew he was related to the Romanovs. So they drew his DNA and tested the bones of the bodies they found, and that's how they verified that. We talked about the Herndon family. More I've dug up. William Henry Herndon. He was Abraham Lincoln's law partner. Commander William Lewis Herndon. The town of Herndon, Virginia is named after him. His father worked at the Farmers Bank in Fredericksburg. His daughter was married to President Chester Alan Arthur. Sheriff Edward Herndon from Spotsy, his son, Edward Herndon III, was also the sheriff of Spotsy.
It does run in the family.
Does run in the family. and it's in the blood. My father, my uncle, me, my dad was with the South Carolina Highway Patrol, my uncle was with the North Carolina Highway Patrol. Through my journey of doing my genealogy, and Karen brought us up and says, you need to do this. I have found sheriffs, deputy sheriffs, police officers, Texas Rangers, highway patrolmen / state troopers, judges, magistrates, and attorneys, even going back beyond the 1300s, that were in some type of law enforcement. The reason she told me I need to showcase this is, and I wanted to tell you all this is why it's so important for me coming and talking to you and everybody else coming and talking, is that I decided, and I had a boss that came to me, he came up here, we were riding around King George and this area, so I started talking about Revolutionary War, Civil War, and he looks at me like I've got two heads. Now this is a college-educated gentleman. I won't go far, gentleman. But anyway, he was my supervisor. I said, have you never heard of these people? He said, Mark, as far as back in school we went was the Korean conflict. And I just fell out. So I decided I'm going to do something different. I'm actually going to write a book. Everybody wants to write a book. Mine is different. My book is for my family, about my family. So I'm doing a little bit of history on these people, whatever I can find out. And with today's technology, if they want to learn more, they can Google it. Google this person and get more information. But I wanted to put something together. And Karen said you need a chapter about it's in the blood. That law enforcement officers are in your blood. And list those law enforcement officers. There's so many, I'm not going to put them up here. But gives you right, there are so many that we felt like we needed to do that. So redneck to northern neck. Found so many relatives that lived in Virginia, especially northern neck here, is mind-blowing. So Karen got her job back when we moved up here in 16. Never heard of King George except for a friend of mine that lived up here. In some cases I heard that these people were famous and that they were relatives of mine. I said, wow. George Washington? Robert E. Lee? My kin? No way. Guess what? And I'll show you, I'll prove it here. So relatives in King George County, Virginia, some of these names may be familiar to y'all. It's a long list. And how shocking. Like I said, we never even heard of King George. When we were looking for a house, a friend of my friend told me, he says, don't live in Maryland, you want to live in Virginia. He lived in King George. I said, well, let's look for something. So we found a location. Our driveway is 2 miles long down in the woods, and I just love it here. And as I'm doing my genealogy, I see these names pop up, and it says, born, King George, Virginia. What? Died, King George, Virginia. Same Westmoreland or Spotsy. What brought me to King George? Why King George? It's almost like my family was calling me, you need to live here where we lived. And I'm not, making that up or blowing things out of proportion. I actually love it here. Very seldom do I have to leave the house much. I really don't need to go anywhere. When I do, it's mainly for the Historical Society. And I love doing things, I love history. But this is, how many of you see any of your family names that listed up here? Hey, cuz. We're cousins. Some way, shape, or form. Other Virginians I'm related to, Jeb Stewart, A.P. Hill, Edward Diggs, as we said before, Hugh Mercer, the Sheriff Herndon, Governor Spotswood, Colonel John Page, Admiral Richard Byrd. How many of you went to school and we've heard of most of all of these people? How many of you really studied Admiral Byrd and what he did in school? Does anybody know who doesn't know what Admiral Byrd did? He discovered Antarctica.
Wasn't he a bird, was a governor?
No, Admiral Byrd discovered Antarctica. And do you know where he lived? He's from Winchester.
And he did what?
He discovered Antarctica, North Pole and the South Pole. He explored it. And matter of fact, he named one of the craters in Antarctica after his wife. I said, okay. Yep, that was my wife. I'll name it that. But I thought it was very interesting because we studied him in school, along with the others, but Admiral Byrd really sticks out to me. Other Virginians I'm related to, Captain John Rolfe, y'all know his wife, Pocahontas, King Carter, William Claiborne, Nathaniel Bacon, Patrick Henry. And what's funny is Karen was reading a book and was reading about Bacon's Rebellion, and then I found out I'm related to him. And so let me stop here for a second. So Karen, would you tell everybody in the room what's your maiden name?
Franklin.
Franklin. So she says she's always been saying I'm related to Benjamin Franklin. Well, she hasn't been able to work on his tree as much as I have. So I'm working on Jeb Stewart and his family and his wife's family, and then all of a sudden, bingo, who am I related to?
Benjamin Franklin.
Benjamin Franklin. See, I got something on her now. Very seldom do I get that. I just had to do that. I'm sorry. I'll pay for it later. I found out I'm related to 13 presidents. You saw earlier, my grandmother used to say we're related to John Adams. Well, my cousin did the genealogy work. He didn't have the internet like we did. And so I said, there's a reason she said this. We're at Adams. We got to be related. So I worked up as far as I could, worked up to where my cousin had worked up, and went a little bit further. And I said, I was in the bath side, it came to my mind, I'm going to try this. So I'm going to try where everybody's been trying to go up, and I've gotten up to a certain point. I'm going to go to John Adams and come down and see if I find where they may cross. And there's a reason my cousin didn't get there, because it's not a straight shot. Down the line, one of those brothers came over, it was our side of the family. So you have to, it's kind of like you're going up, it kind of goes this way, and then back this way, and it gets to John Adams and John Quincy Adams. So we were able to follow that. And one of the cool things, we finally went to Philadelphia last year, and we went to Independence Hall. And I don't know if y'all know this. Y'all probably do. I didn't. At Independence Hall, there's one side that was actually the same valuation as the White House before the White House was actually built. So I was able to talk to one of the Rangers, and I stood there right next to the same chair that John Adams sat in when he took the oath of office as the President of the United States. And so I've got a picture of that, which I think is pretty cool. I know it doesn't mean much. But anyway, so let's move on. The other thing that's pretty cool, I'm a very big follower of John Kennedy, and I found out I'm related to him through Jackie, which I thought was pretty cool. Other notable relatives, William Brewster, Miles Standish, William Bradford, Isaac Allerton. And then you get to Mary Chilton, and I found this out. And we talked about, we learned, getting history. Supposedly, Mary Chilton is the first European woman to step ashore at Plymouth, Massachusetts. And I'm related to her. Pretty cool. Then I find out I'm related to George Calvert, first mayor of Baltimore. 17 of the 56 delegates that signed the Declaration of Independence, I find out I'm related to. 17 of them. I was telling my cousin that did the genealogy a while back about Thomas Lynch. He said, "No way." I said, "Yeah." And so he actually went to Thomas Lynch's home in South Carolina, and he didn't know that we were related to him. William Mitchell Adams, my third great grandfather. We talked about learning history and learning stories. This is very interesting with William Adams. When he was 10 years old, his mother sent him to the store. William encountered some Tories. They pulled him off of his horse, questioned him. They were trying to locate patriots and treasurers in the area. He refused to answer their questions. So they put a rope around his neck, threw the rope over a tree, and started to hang him. They let him hang for a couple of minutes. They let him down. They questioned him again. He said, "I'm not going to tell you anything." A 10-year-old boy. So the Tories said, "Fine." So they hoisted him back up, tied the rope off, and they left him there to hang to death. And they told him that he was going to hang till the breath left his body. So William's horse doesn't know where to go. Where's he going to go to? Usually go back home, right? Went back home. Mom got worried. Got on the horse, went round the road, and found young William hanging from the tree by his neck. Cut him down. He survived. Became a soldier for the Continental Army. He married 4 times and had 16 children. This is what happens with 4 wives and 16 children at 30 years old, okay? Actually, William lived to be 96 years old. And of course, that's my third great grandfather. I thought it was a very interesting story. My cousins had found out about some of this and told me about it, and then I started researching it, and there's different stories out there of what happened, but it's all the same thing, that the Tories tried to question him, and at 2 years old, he would not give up the ghost.
Where was, what area?
Marlboro County, South Carolina. And what I also found, another piece of information, so Marlboro is right there at the North Carolina line, around Bennettsville, Sherrill area, Laurinburg area. Marlboro County used to run from the coast of South Carolina to the Mississippi River. But of course, as treaties and everything else came into place, it ended up just a small county in South Carolina. Westward expansion, Daniel Boone, William Clark. Things that other people all learned about in school, and I'm related to them. War of 1812. I said, Francis Scott Key. No way. The Civil War. Back when Lincoln had set the nomination for the Illinois Republican Party as U.S. Senator, he gave the House divided speech. More history I found out. It appears 3 times in the Bible. And Jesus states that if a house be divided against itself, that house cannot stand. The Civil War has been described pitting brother against brother, father against son, son against father, even with opposing ideas. 750,000 people died in the Civil War. This war was destruction of families, and I'm going to prove it to you through my family. Colonel Peter Adams, who died at Camp Waccamaw, entered in battle. Colonel Leggett Adams died in Confederate Hospital in Mississippi. And you see all of these Adams. Lieutenant Harris R. Adams died at Gettysburg. John Robertson Adams died at Cold Harbor. William Frank Adams, he made it through the war along with Joshua Adams. Alexander Buchanan, James Calvin Buchanan, brothers. One was killed at Cold Harbor, the other was killed at Gaines Mill. Anybody ever heard of Philip St. George Cook? He was a Union general. His son was John Rogers Cook with the Confederate States of America. His son-in-law was Jeb Stuart. Jeb named his 5th child after his father-in-law. When Jeb found out that his father-in-law was not coming to the Confederacy, he legally had his son's name changed to Junior and refused. He never spoke to his father-in-law again, especially since he was killed at Yellow Tavern in the Confederate Army in the Civil War. Harris Rollins Easterly, Andrew Jackson Easterly, Nelson A. Easterly, and Nicholas S. Fletcher. Harris, Jackson, and Nelson were brothers, and Nicholas was their brother-in-law. All of them killed in the Civil War. General George Meade, John Hunt Morgan, Cornelius Smith Newton. I'm only listing a small number of my family members that were in these wars. But every one that you see that I've listed is a family member. World War I. My grandfather, Jesse Adams, second cousin, George Smith Batten Jr. was a captain in World War I. World War II. My uncle brother is what my family called him. Throughout my life, I knew that he received a certificate from the Navy, not knowing what had happened. My cousin told me, one winter's night in 1944, my uncle's ship was attacked and eventually sank. Uncle brother was severely wounded, but he continued to man his gun. After 7 hours, he was ordered to abandon ship. By the time he left the sinking ship, all the life rafts were gone. The guard described the night before, so dark they couldn't tell the sea from the sky. The smell of fuel oil coated the frigid water, from human remains, ship parts littered the black tomb. The small fire from the ship was the only illumination they had. He had leg cramps. He was burning. The fuel was burning his wounds. He was cold, and in the distance he saw a life raft. In the beginning, they were not going to pick him up because they were full. But there was a man on that raft that my uncle had befriended. They hated this man. Everybody on the ship hated him because he thought he was, well, one, he was a loner, and that he was better than anybody else. My uncle spoke to him and always talked to him, but he didn't treat him like the others did. Well, when the raft pulled up, they said, we don't have room for any more. And this guy, which was a very large sailor, said, we got room for him. So they pulled my uncle on board. And other thing I did not figure out is that when my uncle got back from World War II, he didn't want to go back to Gibson High School because if he went back, he was going to be older than the people because he actually lied on his application to the Navy. He was 16 years old when he joined the Navy during World War II. So he wanted to go back and get his high school degree. The other thing I did not know, it was not just a certificate. He had actually received a Purple Heart for bravery. He never told anybody except one of his daughters. And I just found out recently about it, which I thought was pretty cool. Other notable relatives, Thomas Edison, Johnny Herndon Mercer, General Patton, Johnny Depp. This is where I'm trying to get my younger cousins to get involved. How many of you ever listened to Johnny Mercer? You ever heard of Johnny Mercer? Oh, my mom used to live there. Oh, she loved Johnny Mercer. If she'd have known we were cousins, oh my gosh. Relative to Hugh Mercer, the general in the Revolutionary War, he had the apothecary there down on town in Fredericksburg, on Carolina Street. Lucille Ball, Judy Garland, John Wayne, Elvis Presley, Nicolas Cage. Yeah, my dad, if he knew that me and my dad used to sit there at the dinner and we watched old John Wayne movies all the time. We loved John. I still love John Wayne today. He reminds me of my dad. If he knew we were related, the dude. Elvis Presley, and then Karen, she worked on a case when she was in private practice where they actually stayed at Nicolas Cage's house up in the Bahamas on his island. If she'd only knew she was related to him. Because earlier I told you about my grandfather's not knowing him. My father was 2 years old when my grandfather died. 6 months ago, I found a picture in my old box of my mom's. Back of the picture was a handwritten note, my mother's handwriting. James, June, Jim, MC, Dickie, and Dot. This is the first time I'd ever seen my grandfather. Still emotional. My Uncle Lee, my Uncle James, my dad, they all looked alike, but this is the actual first photograph I found of my grandfather. And what's funny is, so when I'm looking at the picture, I said, wonder who this boy is, and this girl, and this girl, and this girl. Well, that's my daddy at 2 years old with long hair. If he'd have been alive and I'd have found this picture, it'd be young, because he always took me to the barbershop and I had to get the closest haircut. He said, boy, you don't get a haircut, I'm going to put a bowl in your head and cut it with scissors. But I thought this was pretty cool. So with that being said, to our young people, ask questions, have your parents or grandparents tell the stories, document everything, record them telling the stories. Can you imagine your descendants hearing your ancestors telling the stories in their voice? Those recordings can be uploaded to genealogy databases. You old people, make sure you tell the stories to your children and grandchildren. Don't be selfish and not tell the stories. Tell the stories that your parents told you or your grandparents told you. The other thing is, and just so you know my mom, the way my mom's thinking was, she used to work for payroll with South Carolina Electric and Gas. And anytime she purchased something of value, like a VCR or something, and we knew this because when we cleaned out her attic, we found these. She had the VCR box up in the attic. Taped to the box was the receipt, and then handwritten in her handwriting was the date they purchased it, what the cost was, all the pertinent information. She said one day that ink will run out, but my handwriting won't. And so she documented everything. Well, like I said, on the back of that picture, she saw it and she asked the questions and she wrote it down. If she hadn't written it down, I do not know who that was. So make sure that you go through your old pictures. Identify the people in those pictures. Digitize those pictures if possible. Put them on a USB drive or a shared cloud drive. Somebody that knows where it is. You can get an MP4 recording device. You can record yourself or your parents, your grandparents, your kids, and upload it to Ancestry.com or some other genealogy. And imagine being able to hear your mother tell the old stories that she had heard from her parents in her voice. Oh, I'd give anything to be able to do that. My mother, when we started to try to do it, the dementia had kicked in so hard she couldn't remember anything. And I kicked myself for not starting this earlier. So I started off with 12 relatives. I'm now up to 38,732 relatives. To know where you're going, you need to know where you came from. Remember that. It's extremely important. It's what we're about. It's what we have got to do for the community of King George County. Other things is just some random photos that I've put together. That's my nanny. That's my granny. That's my grandfather, mother's side, grandfather. My little girl. My Uncle James, my dad, my little girl, and the love of my life. Thank you for putting up with me.